Welcome back to another deep dive here at the Rooster Podlog. And today we've got, well, for you, the listener, it's going to be a fascinating journey back to a period of just dramatic change in India,
Yeah,
the Green Revolution.
absolutely.
You've shared some really interesting material with us, detailing how this whole thing unfolded in the late 1960s. And, what really jumps out at me is it's just this story of problem solving on a massive scale,
Right.
driven by scientific breakthroughs, political will, and just incredible human effort.
Yeah.
I mean, it shifted India from relying on food imports to feeding its own massive population and beyond.
It is remarkable when you consider the sheer scale of the challenge they were facing. This wasn't just about tweaking existing agricultural practices. This was about fundamentally rethinking how to produce enough food for a rapidly growing nation. And I think what's fascinating for you to consider is how this immense undertaking really hinged on the dedication and vision of a few key individuals who each in their own way were grappling with this very pressing problem of widespread hunger and food insecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the sources highlight three key figures right at the heart of this revolution. And for you, it's really interesting to see how their strengths combined. There's Norman Borlaug, an American agronomist who developed these high-yielding wheat varieties.
Right.
Then there's M.S. Swaminathan, the Indian scientist, who really took those innovations and adapted them for local conditions.
Exact.
And then, of course, there's Indira Gandhi, the prime minister, who provided that crucial political backing for nationwide implementation. It's almost like a perfect storm of talent and timing, all focused on this one critical issue.
Exactly. If you kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture for you, you see how often significant societal shifts are driven by this interplay between innovation adaptation and then the will to implement those changes at scale. And in this case, the stakes were incredibly high because the lives and livelihoods of millions of people depended on finding a solution.
Yeah, they really did. Our mission today is to kind of unpack how these three individuals, with their very unique skills and perspectives, tackled this massive challenge of ensuring food security for an entire nation.
Right.
We're going to look at their specific contributions, how they collaborated, and of course the immense impact of their combined efforts.
Yeah.
And it's a story with both remarkable successes and some significant challenges that we see even today still shaping Indian agriculture.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack this for you and see what stands out, starting with Norman Borlaug, the seed innovator.
Yeah. I think what's crucial for you to understand about Borlaug is his fundamental drive to combat global hunger. This wasn't just an academic in an ivory tower. His work was very much rooted in a desire to see real-world impact. His background as an American agronomist was really focused on the central problem of how to feed more people more effectively.
And his big breakthrough came in Mexico in the 1960s, right?
Yeah.
He developed these dwarf, disease-resistant, high-yielding wheat varieties. And that dwarf characteristic seems really key here.
Sure.
So why was that so important in solving the problem of low yields?
That's right. The traditional taller wheat varieties, when they would produce heavier loads of grain, they had a tendency to fall over or lodge, which would essentially ruin the harvest. So Borlaug's innovation in breeding dwarf varieties meant the plants had these stronger, shorter stalks that could support significantly heavier grain heads without collapsing. It was a real aha moment in plant breeding because it fundamentally changed the potential yield. This genetic modification often involved specific genes that altered the plant's architecture, allowing it to allocate more energy to grain production rather than stem growth, which was a very cutting-edge concept in plant science at the time.
It's amazing to think about, a seemingly small change in the plant's structure making such a massive difference in output and directly addressing that core problem of, insufficient food production. And his work wasn't confined to Mexico, was it? I mean, it had this huge global impact in tackling hunger.
Absolutely. His work is credited with saving over 1 billion lives worldwide, which is just a staggering figure. And it's the reason why he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. It really underscores for you the direct link between agricultural innovation and preventing human suffering on a massive scale. He also received the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Congressional Gold Medal, further highlighting the importance of his contributions in addressing these global food shortages.
A Nobel Peace Prize for developing better wheat. I mean, it really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't just about science. It was about, global stability and well-being, very directly addressing this fundamental human need. And it sounds like he wasn't just some lab guy either.
Yeah.
The sources mentioned his very hands-on approach, which must have been critical in translating his research into those real-world solutions.
Yeah, that's a crucial aspect for you to understand about his character and his methodology. His motto is act more, talk less. and he really lived by it. You'd find him right there in the fields, working alongside farmer students and researchers. This direct engagement, understanding the practical challenges firsthand, was integral to his success in developing solutions that were not only scientifically sound, but also practically implementable by farmers.
So here you have this American scientist with these revolutionary seeds, and then you have India facing these severe food shortages in the 1960s. And that's where the collaboration with MS Swaminathan becomes so vital in addressing India's very specific crisis, right?
Precisely, Borlaug's work in Mexico provided the blueprint, but adapting those high-yielding varieties to the specific conditions in India, the climate, the soil, the local diseases, that was the critical next step if they were going to solve this food security problem. And that's where Swaminathan's expertise comes in.
So let's dive into Swaminathan's story.
Yeah.
He's often called the father of the Green Revolution in India. I mean, that title itself speaks volumes about his importance in this whole journey to self-sufficiency, wouldn't you say?
It does, and his early life experiences really shaped his commitment to solving India's food crisis. Growing up on a farm in the 1930s, he already had a firsthand understanding of agricultural challenges, but it was witnessing the devastating Bengal famine of 1943 that truly galvanized his passion to address India's chronic food insecurity. Millions perished in that famine, and it left an indelible mark on him, fueling his determination to find solutions.
Yeah, it's powerful to think about how such a, personal and national tragedy fueled his life's work, driving him to find a way to prevent that kind of suffering from ever happening again. And the sources mentioned his family wanted him to be a surgeon.
Right.
For very different paths from agricultural science.
That's right. His family envisioned a career in medicine for him. But that deep-seated desire to solve this food security problem led him to pursue agricultural science. Instead, he excelled academically, earning multiple degrees in genetics and plant breeding. And even before his direct involvement with wheat, he was doing pioneering work in cryogenetics with potato crops. This demonstrates for you his inherent drive to use science for very practical problem solving.
So he had this strong scientific foundation and this really deep personal motivation to solve India's hunger problem. How did he connect with Borlaug's work and bring it to India for implementation?
What's fascinating for you to observe here is Swaminathan's proactive approach to problem solving. Recognizing the potential of Borlaug's dwarf wheat varieties, he took the initiative to invite Borlaug to India. He understood that while the Mexican varieties were groundbreaking, they needed to be adapted to thrive in the diverse agroclimatic zones of India. The specific goal was to achieve those same higher yields, but with stocks strong enough to withstand Indian conditions. What he astutely recognized was that simply transplanting those varieties wouldn't work. So they focused on crossbreeding those high-yield strains with existing Indian varieties to retain their resilience against local pests and diseases. This was a crucial insight that went beyond just agronomy and delved into the intricacies of regional biodiversity.
And it wasn't just about bringing the seeds over, was it? I mean, he really focused on making sure that Indian farmers could actually use them effectively in their own fields.
Absolutely. Swaminathan understood that scientific breakthroughs alone wouldn't solve the problem. He spearheaded the establishment of thousands of demonstration plots across northern India starting in 1965. This was a crucial step in convincing small-scale farmers that these new varieties could indeed thrive in their own fields. Seeing is believing, especially for farmers who are often risk-averse when it comes to adopting new methods.
And the impact was almost immediate and quite dramatic from what I've read in these sources.
It was under his guidance, India's wheat production skyrocketed, and the numbers are quite staggering when you consider them, from 12 million tons to 23 million tons in just 4 crop seasons. That's almost a doubling of production in a very short period, directly attributable to the adoption of these improved wheat varieties and the supporting agricultural practices they championed together.
That's incredible. And beyond just increasing yields, it sounds like Swaminathan also had this broader vision for Indian agriculture and the long-term sustainability of food production. The evergreen revolution concept is mentioned. And what was that all about in terms of addressing these future challenges?
Yeah. The evergreen revolution was his philosophy of aiming for continuous improvement in agricultural productivity. But without degrading the environment, he recognized early on that while increasing yields was crucial in the short term to solve the immediate crisis, long-term food security depended on sustainable practices that protect natural resources for future generations.
He was thinking long-term.
He was.
Yeah, and he was also a strong advocate for the farmers themselves, not just the science of farming.
Exactly.
Ensuring that the solutions really benefited those on the ground.
He understood that the success of any agricultural revolution depended on the well-being of the farmers. He played a key role in advocating for and introducing minimum support prices for wheat and rice, which provided a safety net for farmers and incentivized them to adopt new technologies. He also served as the chairman of the National Commission on Farmers, where he was instrumental in developing the National Farmers Welfare Policy. Furthermore, his work led to the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act of 2001, which aimed to balance the rights of plant breeders and farmers, ensuring a fair system for all involved.
So you have Borlaug with that initial innovation of the seeds,
Yeah.
Swaminathan with the critical adaptation for India and the on-the-ground implementation, and then comes Indira Gandhi. Her role as prime minister seems so crucial in providing the necessary political will and support to scale these solutions nationwide.
Indeed, Indira Gandhi assumed office as prime minister in January 1966 at a time when India was heavily reliant on food aid, particularly from the United States. This dependence was not only economically draining, but also carried a certain degree of political vulnerability.
Yeah, the sources highlight her strong commitment to achieving agricultural self-sufficiency and ending that reliance on foreign aid for food. I mean, it must have been a huge priority for her administration.
Absolutely. The fact that India was importing 10 million tons of wheat annually really underscores the scale of the problem they needed to solve. Her commitment to ending this dependency was unwavering, and it was a symbolic moment in 1971 when India finally achieved food self-sufficiency under her leadership.
And she actively encouraged the collaboration between Indian scientists like Swaminathan and international experts like Borlaug. Fostering an environment where these problem solvers could work together, that top-level support must have been invaluable in accelerating progress.
It was critical her government provided the necessary resources and backing for those collaborations to flourish. She also actively promoted the adoption of new agricultural technologies among farmers. And the sources mention the enthusiasm with which Indian farmers embraced these new varieties under her leadership.
Yeah, it sounds like she provided that overarching vision and the political muscle to make it all happen nationwide, ensuring that the scientific solutions could really be implemented at scale.
Exactly. Her administration provided the necessary political leadership and vision for the nationwide implementation of the Green Revolution. This included supporting the adoption of those high-yielding varieties, investing in increased irrigation infrastructure, and ensuring the availability of fertilizers and pesticides. Without this high-level commitment and coordination, the efforts of scientists like Borlaug and Swaminathan might not have had such a transformative impact.
Yeah, and ultimately, under her leadership and with that foundation laid by Borlaug and Swaminathan, India made that remarkable transition from a food-deficient nation to one that could feed itself and even become a food exporter. That's a monumental shift.
It is, and she also recognized that land ownership played a crucial role in agricultural productivity. So her land reforms initiative included convening that Chief Ministers Conference in 1969 and her powerful message in 1970 emphasizing the critical link between land reform and food self-sufficiency. She even drew parallels with the successful land reform efforts in other countries like Mexico, Japan, and Iran, showing a broader understanding of this issue.
So with these three key figures driving the change, how did the implementation actually unfold on the ground, and what was that immediate impact of their combined efforts?
The initial focus was on regions like Punjab, Haryana, and western Uttar Pradesh. These areas had more favorable conditions, particularly in terms of existing irrigation infrastructure, which was crucial for the success of these high-yielding varieties.
So a strategic decision to start where the chances of success were highest.
Precisely, the implementation involved a multi-pronged approach, introducing the high-yielding varieties, promoting the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, expanding irrigation facilities, and gradually introducing mechanization like tractors. It was a comprehensive effort to modernize agriculture and increase food production.
And the results, as we touched on earlier, were pretty rapid and significant.
They were in the very first year of widespread adoption. Around 2.4 million hectares were planted with these HYV seeds, and within that first year, grain output jumped by a staggering 5 million tons. By 1971, the total grain yield reached 104 million tons, a 40% increase compared to the drought years just prior to the revolution.
Yeah, that kind of increase must have had a huge impact on the economy and the lives of ordinary people, particularly in those initial focus areas.
It did. Punjab in particular experienced significant economic prosperity. Agricultural output increased dramatically, and farmers' incomes rose by over 70% in a relatively short period by 1970. Punjab alone was producing 70% of India's total food grains.
Wow. But as the saying goes, sometimes there are unintended consequences
Right.
that arise even from well-intentioned efforts. The sources mention some criticisms and challenges that emerged from the Green Revolution over time.
Yes. While that immediate goal of achieving food security was met over time, several negative environmental impacts became apparent. The increased use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides led to the pollution of waterways and the death of beneficial insects. Intensive irrigation practices caused soil degradation and the depletion of groundwater in many areas.
And that shift towards monoculture, focusing on just a few high-yielding crops, also had environmental implications, right?
Absolutely. It led to a loss of biodiversity as traditional crop varieties were abandoned. Additionally, the rise in stubble burning, particularly in the northern states since the 1980s, has become a major contributor to air pollution.
And beyond those environmental costs, there were also economic and social challenges, right? Especially for those smaller farmers who maybe didn't have the resources to fully adopt these new technologies.
That's a critical point for you to understand. The technologies associated with the Green Revolution, the HYV seeds, the fertilizers, pesticides, irrigation, they often required significant financial investment. Many small farmers struggled to afford these inputs, leading to increased borrowing, often at very high interest rates. This created a cycle of debt for many, and tragically has been linked to the rise in farmer suicides in some regions, particularly in Punjab. The significant increase in suicides in 1992-93 and the continued issue of indebtedness and suicides, even as reported as recently as 2019, are stark reminders of those economic vulnerabilities.
And the benefits weren't evenly distributed geographically either, it seems, leading to new regional disparities.
That's correct. The success of those Green Revolution technologies was largely dependent on having assured water supply and access to inputs. As a result, states with good irrigation and infrastructure like Punjab, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh benefited much more than dryland areas, leading to this widening of regional economic disparities.
So a complex legacy, indeed, a major triumph in terms of food security, but also these significant environmental and socioeconomic costs that continue to be debated. What about the enduring influence of these three individuals today and the lessons we can learn from their problem-solving approaches?
Well, Norman Borlaug's impact continues through institutions like the Borlaug Institute, which carries on his mission of combating hunger through agricultural science in developing countries. They emphasize his Borlaug legacy, which includes elements like preventing conflict through food security, taking knowledge to farmers directly, and encouraging effective governance.
And Swaminathan's vision seems to have had a lasting impact on how India thinks about agricultural development and that need for sustainable solutions.
Definitely, his concept of the Evergreen Revolution continues to advocate for sustainable practices, and his later work focused on initiatives like eco-technology-based biovillages and village knowledge centers, aiming to empower rural communities with knowledge and sustainable technologies. His role in creating the All India Agricultural Research Service was also crucial in fostering a strong scientific community dedicated to agricultural innovation.
And even Indira Gandhi's policies really laid the groundwork for India's continued progress in agriculture, albeit with those complexities we've discussed.
Yeah.
It shows the lasting impact of political will in addressing those national challenges.
Yes, the current context, including those recent farmer protests, reflects the ongoing tensions between the need for agricultural productivity, environmental sustainability, and the economic welfare of farmers. There's this debate about whether the Green Revolution was really a sustainable long-term solution or more of a quick fix that led to new challenges like over-reliance on subsidies, increased water usage, and monoculture, which in turn has spurred interest in alternative farming methods.
So as you can see, this deep dive into the Green Revolution reveals a really complex story of human ingenuity and its far-reaching consequences. The efforts of Borlaug, Swaminathan, and Gandhi undeniably transformed India's ability to feed itself, which is a monumental achievement driven by their individual expertise and collaborative spirit. And here's where it gets really interesting for you. While their work solved this critical immediate problem, it also laid the groundwork for new challenges that India continues to grapple with today.
What stands out is this interconnectedness of science policy and the lives of everyday people. It wasn't just about better seeds, it was about adapting those seeds to local conditions and having the political will to make those changes happen on a massive scale. But the story doesn't end there. The environmental and economic ripples of the Green Revolution are still being felt, prompting these important questions about sustainability and equity in agriculture.
Yeah, and this deep dive hopefully gives you a much richer understanding of this really pivotal period in India's history and those incredible efforts of these three individuals to solve a massive problem. It's a reminder that progress is often multifaceted with both triumphs and trade-offs, and perhaps it prompts you to consider in our own time what seemingly straightforward solutions might have these complex and long-lasting impacts that we need to be mindful of. That's something for you to think about.
Absolutely.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.